Hi. Just thought I'd put a few reflections together in relation to a paper I was reading recently, and it was in the Journal of Sport and Exercise Psychology 2014, and it relates to working with religious and spiritual athletes, and focuses on sort of ethical considerations. And I suppose, firstly, I'd just like to say I found it really interesting as an article. There was some really sort of stimulating points being made in it, and it certainly made me reflect on my own practice, and how certainly over the last 20 years or so, I've not really given a huge amount of consideration to these kinds of issues. And I remember as I was reading it, it was the kinds of thoughts that were occurring to me were around, well, how would I, or should I, or are there situations where it's important to refer to and bring out a discussion of religion and spirituality? And one of the interesting sort of tangents that occurred to me is in my own practice, I try never to refer to luck. So when I'm working with athletes, I can't say I never do it. Sometimes, it will slip out. But I try never to say good luck, because my personal philosophy is that luck doesn't come into it. The old phrase, the more you practice, the luckier you get. All those kinds of pithy little statements, if you like, highlighting the fact that by and large your performance is in your control over time. So I never refer to luck, and often will actually talk to athletes and frame what I say to athletes in that sense, and it's almost like trying to stress their autonomy, their competence, and so on and so forth. And it suddenly occurred to me, or it started to occur to me, that, well, I wonder how sometimes me saying that might impact on an athlete who has a very strong faith, who believes that a lot of what he or she actually achieves is not down to themselves, it is down to their God or their faith. So yeah, I started to ponder some of those things, and think, well, do I need to think about how I address groups of athletes, with that in mind? To be honest, at an overt level, I've never encountered or had to discuss any issues around religion with athletes, and that is clearly not to say there aren't athletes who have strong faiths within many of the teams that I've worked with. And following on from that notion of, is there a point at which my own position on faith would become a salient part of an interaction? And that's tricky. That would be tricky for me. And so what's interesting about the article, it actually does provide a framework in which we can think about and discuss the kind of ethical issues when you're working with religious and spiritual athletes. They use what's called the RICC, which it's an acronym, stands for respect, responsibility, integrity, competence, and concern. And I think that what my learning at the moment, because I'm still reflecting on my learning at the moment from that, is one of, well, if the situation arises, or if it becomes apparent that religion or faith is impacting upon the dynamic, then there needs to be a kind of framework for discussion of that. And one of the good things about the article, it's a starting point. It actually starts it's a starting point for that kind of discussion. So yeah, a really interesting article, and certainly one that I have started to reflect upon from a very practical perspective. Cheers.